right. So I think we should get started, if that's okay. I think the first thing I want to do is say welcome back to lots of you. I can see, based on the names in the participants list here, that lots of you joined our webinar a few months back now in July. But a warm welcome to any new guests. We've really been looking forward to today, to be honest, for reasons that I'll head into in just a minute. But I think what we should start with is just a quick round of intros for those of you that don't know myself and both Adrian and Vilas. Of course, I have a slide to introduce us, but I think it's probably slightly better if we introduce ourselves. So I'm Peter, I'm the VP of Sales here at Blink. Been here for 7 years, so great to meet any of you that I haven't yet. And I'm joined by both Vilas and Adrian, so I'll pass to each of you in that order to say a quick hello.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vilas. I'm a senior solutions architect here at Blink, and I've been here for just over a year now. And I'll pass it on to Adrian.
Thanks, Willis. Hi, I'm Adrian. I am a team lead in the solutions engineering team. I've been at Blink for knocking on 2 years now, and recently been heading up the technical efforts around the workplace migration strategy at Blink.
Thanks, team. We've also got Amelia, who's sort of moderating. You might have seen her just pop a message in the chat. Listen, normal kind of webinar rules apply. Feel free to send us messages directly or post them in the group chat. We're going to be running a Q&A at the end, but I'm going to go into the spirit of this webinar in a moment, and I hope that there's lots of questions and things that you want to ask. Please don't shy away from doing that. I mentioned the spirit of this webinar. So I was at a conference yesterday, and I met someone who said that she was sick of hearing words like seamless when people talk about meta migrations. She wanted real actionable insights and truth talk, which is exactly the spirit of this webinar. So I hope we can kind of stay true to that. Let me talk to you a little bit about the plan. I am going to introduce in just a moment, reintroduce you to Vilas to talk and maybe reintroduce this like 30,000-foot view that we have on a migration approach very quickly. That was the sort of basis of our last webinar, so we won't go into too much detail there. But then what we want to do is try and group all of our learnings from the migrations that we've been doing into 3 key pillars. Again, avoiding words like seamless and any kind of sales and marketing spiel, and trying to leave you with some super actionable insights from this webinar. That's our goal. And maybe some ways of thinking about the migration, which should constructively influence or challenge the approach that you might be taking. Now, it's good to see a lot of you back here from the first webinar. You might remember we spent quite a lot of time in that one talking about the elephant in the room, which is that lots of you don't want to be in this position. You have loads of competing priorities. You don't want to be in concurrent sales processes with loads of vendors, and you don't want to be planning a migration from a platform that many of you loved. I just want to repeat, we see you and we hear you. Lots has happened since the last time that we got together, not just in the market, but I'm sure in terms of the processes that you're all running. Back then, I think most of you were probably right at the start of your journeys, and the kind of content in our webinar reflected that. It was really talking about migration from a technical perspective, like showing it was possible, and what the API allowed you to do, which probably reflected the concern in the market that people would lose their data, lose their hard work, and all their content. But that was back in July, like I said. And I think broadly speaking, everyone's pretty comfortable with the fact now that like there's lots of options Meta have given to extract and transfer that data. And we can share a link to that webinar if it's helpful. But you've moved on, and I would imagine a lot of you have assessed your current usage of Workplace, you've shortlisted some platforms, maybe you've even engaged a partner. But ultimately, you've probably now come to the conclusion that migration is not just an API. And I think if I have one question for each of you today, it is beyond transferring content, what does migration really mean to you? We were talking with one customer just this last week in London about the fact that, yes, they want to transfer their content, but not necessarily the logic for things like team structures, permissions, chatbots, and so on. So when we're talking about migration, really, we're talking about migrating not from one platform to another, but from one way of working to another. And that's what we really want to double down on today. So I'm going to pass to Vilas first to reintroduce that migration overview, and then onto the core 3 pillars.
Right. Thanks, Pete. So some of you might already recall this framework, but I'll just recap for the benefit of the new participants on this webinar. So the way that we approach or decided to approach migrations is following this kind of 5-step, 5-phased plan. And this is something that we've wanted to spend more time in this webinar to share our experiences and learnings by going through this journey a few times already. But just to kind of remind you as well that what we see happening is that all successful migrations usually need to start with detailed scoping and planning of the migration. And then, as we'll cover in a little bit, we'll see that there's multiple angles to look at it. There's, of course, mapping of the data across the platforms. So it's easy to say feed posts, that both platforms support feed posts, both platforms have knowledge-based content, both platforms have groups and users. But then once you start deep diving into the nitty-gritty detail, this is where you start finding challenges and functional nuances that you need to address and enter this start this migration journey with clarity and transparency of how things will look like once you've moved over, and making decisions as well how you are going to tackle those challenges. I would say that these first 2 steps is what probably will take 70-80% of the time and effort. And then once that's done, if that's done correctly, then setting up the migration tool, which pulls the data via the Meta Workplace Graph API, transferring that data and then launching and activating your users becomes pretty straightforward. One thing I wanted to also kind of share is this data mapping or stress is this data mapping stage. And for that, we've developed an assessment framework. There's a set of documents and guides getting you familiar with what features and functionality you had at Workplace and how does that translate into Blink World, and proposing various approaches and ideas or thoughts of how you might want to transfer that functionality or that experience from one platform to another. This also kind of doubles as technical specification that over time, if you use it as a living document, by the time you start to migrate things, you've got pretty good transparency and clarity in terms of how things will be moved over into Blink. So having that clear mapping plan will ensure a smooth migration and will definitely pay dividends in the future. So we've talked a lot about the context and covered very high level our approach, but what we wanted to do as well is, as I mentioned, share our learnings and tips for success. So the 3 key pillars, in our opinions, for migration success that we found are looking at it from the data, from the technical data migration standpoint. And I think this is where most of the people, they kind of stop. They're focusing on this data migration step. But there's also an element of big element of change management. And then finally, thinking about the user experience. It's not going to be 100% the same. So the way that you leverage those differences is going to determine how smooth the transition is for your users. And the first pillar, the data migration, is where I'll hand it over to Adrian to share his experience from the trenches of technical delivery.
From the trenches, like that. Cool. So if you think about data migration as a pillar, that pillar is also underpinned by some sort of foundation. So any good building, you have the structure, but it has to have a good foundation. So thinking about it like that, there are some key elements that make the data migration pillar stand strong, and I want to talk about a couple of them. The first one being deciding on a data cleanup approach. And when I say data cleanup, what I mean is deciding on how you want to migrate your data, transform your data or delete your data from Workplace to your new platform, how you want to go about kind of cleaning up the stuff that should stay behind and the stuff that should come with. The reason I've found this to be super valuable and really important is that all of us have been, well, most of you on this call would have been using Workplace for some time. You've probably got a couple of hundred, couple of thousand users, and over time, clutter starts to develop on your Workplace instance. Things like old content, polls, events, feed posts that many years ago were perhaps relevant, but are no longer relevant today. We've seen organizations that have got, we've worked with organizations that have got hundreds, if not thousands, of groups that were created for one-off messages or for one-off events that add no value to their present day workplace instance. So data cleanup is important in that it ensures only the most relevant information is coming from Workplace to your new world, to a new platform. With that background, when it comes to a data cleanup approach, we at Blink take a very simple but extremely effective kind of methodology here. Our approach is focus on optimizing long-lived content. So when you're looking at what you want to clean up, what you want to migrate, prioritize content that is informative, important, and kind of designed or built with the intent of being around for quite a while. So if you had to take that approach, or once you've decided on your approach, we've also identified some key strategies that underpin that can kind of help you move that forward and drive that change, as well as some suggestions and kind of tips that we've found really practical in the more technical side of things. Number one, I would suggest assigning champions to lead the cleanup effort. So this might be individuals that lead up teams, it might be by location or managers, but the idea is by assigning this to a number of people, you distribute the effort across a number of different players so that it's not just one person stuck with the cleanup chore. With your champions or teams kind of formed, the next step we would suggest is to clearly communicate cutoff dates. So things like when the cleanup should be complete, when content should no longer be posted on Workplace, and when you're going to actually be doing the full migration to a new platform. Another useful strategy or kind of thing we've identified with these teams is for them to work together to identify rules or heuristics that they can use to categorize or ring fence the content that they want to bring across. So as you are reviewing the content on Workplace, you might decide that you only want to bring across official content, so official group content rather. So as you go through, mark groups as official, unmark them if you think that they shouldn't be in your new platform. We've seen a lot of companies tagging specific teams or audiences as the official ones, and only their content should come across. So, for example, feed posts that are shared to the entire organization should come across, but feed posts shared between me and Villas should not be coming across. So that's a really easy way to slim down the kind of data that you're having to work with and the scope you're having to work around. A lot of companies have also come up with these groups, migration groups on Workplace, where they move the content to this group. So it's super clear what content needs to be transferred and everything else can kind of be left as is. We've also found that this is a really good moment in time to revisit the content that you have, the long-lived content that you have, and how you sharing that or where you're sharing that. And what I mean by that is a lot of the organizations that we've worked with use group chats, for example, to store content that is accessed pretty frequently by a number of people, and having to use a group chat to find that content is just not convenient. You have to find the group, find the chat, scroll to the message. And so while you're doing this cleanup, it's a good opportunity to find those kind of instances and pull them into things like the knowledge library, where all of a sudden multiple people can edit it. It's got a lot more formatting options and editing options built into it, and it's much more easy to discover that content and group it. So as you're cleaning up, as you're looking at feed posts, if you catch anything there that you think, hang on, this is really important, maybe it's onboarding policies and it's sitting somewhere in a feed post from 2022, we suggest moving those things up into the knowledge library. Additionally, as you're doing this cleanup and as you're working through content, another gotcha that we've spotted is internal links. So links that are authenticated in Workplace. So if someone who didn't have a Workplace account tried to click that link, they wouldn't be able to access it. And if you're going to migrate that content to a new platform, obviously those links are not going to be accessible from the new content. So thinking about a strategy around how you want to access that content, maybe you want to recreate it, or maybe just don't want to migrate it altogether, but just knowing that those kind of pitfalls of authenticated links are lurking in the depths is really helpful to ensure a smoother migration journey. And then the last thing on your data cleanup approach, and it might sound super obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway, is if you are a bigger organization or have multiple Workplace instances, we strongly encourage you to approach the migration journey in a phased manner. So instead of doing a big bang rollout of all 20 instances, break it down, be incremental and iterative about it. One instance or a few instances at a time will ensure you keep a more focused scope and that you're not trying to do too much too quickly, which can lead to kind of a disorganized, panicked feeling. So that we found to be really helpful. The second thing underpinning the data migration pillar is assessing data sensitivity and confidentiality. It's quite a mouthful. But what I mean when I say that is during the data migration journey, we encourage all organizations that we work with to have data privacy considerations at the forefront of everything they do. And we encourage them to constantly review content for any kind of data privacy considerations that might put that content as kind of stuff you might want to bring across. So this might be things like content created by users who are no longer active on your Workplace instance, or content created in private groups. There's a little bit of consideration that needs to be baked into that and whether it should be being migrated to your new platform. And this is especially pertinent in cases where you're moving your content across regions, because then you have different data privacy laws, and this also applies when you're moving across different data warehouses. It's something that's quite, if you're on top of it, you're gonna have smooth sailing, but you really do need to just keep that at the forefront of a lot of the data cleanup and migration thinking that you do. In the theme of data sensitivity, there is, sorry, you can stay on the previous slide. There's one hot topic that we're often asked about, and that's chat data. Our recommendation when it comes to chat data is to not migrate historical chat data. This is a twofold. There's two reasons for this, rather. Number one, chat data is ephemeral in nature. It's short-lived. It's not going to offer long historical value. And so going back to that cleanup approach, chats are not something that are going to really, they're not going to offer long-term value. So that's the first reason. But the second reason, going back to the idea of privacy and data concerns, chats expose organizations to risk given kind of the privacy implications around private and personal chats. Now all of a sudden you're having to think about user consent. You need to think about how the two platforms, so Workplace and your new platform, might have different data handling policies and storage policies. They may have different data retention policies. And another really important thing to think about is when you move data from one platform to another, that is someone's personal data, who now owns that data. So for those two reasons, the short-lived nature of chat and the privacy concerns, generally we don't recommend migrating historical chat data. The last thing I want to talk about around data migration pillars is data transformation and getting really familiar with your new platform's data and how it's presented. So on this slide, you can see, and there's a poll there, I encourage you all to put in your answers there. But on this slide, you can see we've got Workplace on the left and Blink on the right-hand side. And when I say understanding data transformation, we encourage you to spend the time getting comfortable with how your data is going to be structured and presented on your new platform. A lot of platforms will have sandbox environments that you can jump into and really sink your teeth into how their features might work, what their kind of feed looks like, what their knowledge library looks like, and so on. And by exploring and really diving into that and seeing how the information flows and how content is organized, you'll have a really insightful view into what you should be migrating and how you should be migrating. So maybe Workplace has some limitations that you've been working around that have forced you to store data in a certain way. And now your new platform solves that pain point. And in fact, you don't need to migrate a bunch of data because it's baked into your platform that you're moving to. Another important thing to consider within this theme of data migration and data transformation is that Workplace has been around for a while, and over time they've introduced new features, um, new functionality, and that means that a lot of data that is especially old is no longer stored in the same way as the new data is stored. So an example of this is the group creation notification. That's one we've noticed. So when you create a new group, there's a little notification that appears. Super old groups are formatted slightly differently to new groups. So finding those really digging in and finding those edge cases will help you, but it'll also point out the data that's really just not worth migrating and leaving behind. And a little benefit as well, sorry, of doing this deep dive into your new platform is that you're going to be one of those people, one of those champions that can really help people at the activation and onboarding stage, because you can guide them and kind of navigate them around, help them navigate the platform. So that's a nice little advantage you would have. So just to recap the data migration pillar, finding a good cleanup approach will really help you. It's a really good time to think about how you're organizing your data, how you're making that data accessible, and the kind of stuff that you want to just leave behind. Thinking about data privacy throughout the data migration journey is going to pay dividends tenfold in the stuff that you're not going to have to worry about. So have that at the forefront. And finally, get familiar with your platform, get familiar with its functionalities, your new platform, and how that data is going to transform. To kind of cap the data migration journey off, this just one thing I'll emphasize, and we've said this to all of our customers and prospects, is the best weapon and the best advantage we have right now, and all of us have right now, is that it's still early days. There's still enough time to get ahead of it, but we all know there's less than a year left until content's going into read-only. And by getting ahead of this sooner rather than later, you can give yourself enough time to do the cleanup, to map everything clearly, and just be ahead of the curve. And that's everything for me on the data migration pillar. So I'll be handing over to Pete to take us through change management.
Thanks, Adrian. Yeah, listen, it's good to go a click deeper on all of that stuff. Like I said, last time around, it was just showing that data transfer is possible. But the experience of the last couple of months has shown us some of the pitfalls and micro concerns that customers are having when actually doing this. I want to change gears and talk about the change management approach that underpins this. So the way I've structured this, you can tell we're like a 3x3 matrix at Blink, is I've got 3 tactical learnings for you on this slide. And then I just wanted to leave you with, I suppose, our belief system or philosophy on the next slide. But point 1 here, so we had a customer recently who has just moved into the launch phase. And they regretted the fact that they left engaging with their champions and influencers until this point when they were launching. And it's funny, like the irony of it wasn't lost on them. They said that it must have felt for their champions like it did for them when Workplace gave them the news. They felt excluded, they felt frustrated, and they felt very short on trust. These are the types of things, and there's a common theme here, which I would wager first time you launch Workplace, these are the brilliant basics that lots of you, I'm sure, were doing very well. What we're seeing is people overextending on the technical side of the migration and perhaps just forgetting some of the things which they already know to be true, like very early engagement with these folks. We've seen one client engage champions and influencers in the sales process, in the selection process, so they feel that agency about the decision and ultimately go and do the great work to make the change viral. This kind of maxim that people endorse what they help to create, I think, is even more true than with migration than ever before. So don't forget that. I'm sure that customer wouldn't mind me sharing that story. The second one's around success measures. So I suppose it's been interesting for us to hear that some of you might have had this in place when you were launching Workplace, like really understanding, what are the metrics that you're looking to drive that constitute success. But lots didn't. And I think you have an opportunity now perhaps to rethink why you're doing this. Everyone, of course, wants to continue engaging and communicating with their people. But really, why is that important for your business? And we have a value realization framework here, which helps customers to think about this, right? So what's the strategic imperative for having this platform? And there are lots of different reasons. Like, that's definitely been interesting for us, is understanding the nuances behind use cases of workplace. Is this about humanizing your leaders, leveraging user-generated content for brand advocacy so you can attract and retain talent? Is it about employee engagement surveys? Is it about maximizing the onboarding experience to kind of fix a leaky bucket? Is it about productivity? So using the knowledge library, for more opportunities for self-service, and stopping this kind of over-reliance on managers. Like, really think about it. What is it that you are trying to affect by introducing this platform? What was Workplace designed to do? Because each of the answers to that question will have a KPI that you can start to align your leadership team around. So put another way, I think this is an opportunity to earn or maintain that kind of strategic seat of communications in the boardroom, because some of you that are familiar with the platform know that the analytics that we have mean that whatever metric it is that you're looking to drive, we'll measure that success with you. So use this as an opportunity and really, I think through what introducing this platform really means for your business and what you're trying to affect. The third thing, we call it the network effect. So practically, when does one platform stop and the other one start? And we saw an example recently where access to both is run concurrently, and we wouldn't advise that. I'm sorry for those of you who are sick of my metaphors, but I feel like this is like trying to have a party in your house in two different rooms at the same time. And what we're trying to do here is get everyone from one room to the other. If you keep the music on in both rooms, you're not going to do that in a very successful way. So turn the music off, put on some white noise, whatever you need to do there. I think that the other thing here is make sure that the music in the other room is blasting. What are you going to do in that room to make sure that people are excited to get over there, over and above what was happening in the other room? Some of you know that we've just released stories and reels in the platform, which is just genuinely a super exciting and new way of engaging people to create content in a type of form factor that wasn't seen before. So showing people how you're leveling up opportunities for engagement in the process of getting them into that new room, I think is a really important way of leveraging what we call the network effect there. So the common theme, as I was saying to you earlier, is don't overextend on the technical side of the migration. Sorry, Adrian. As interesting as it is, you've really got to think about some of these things, which no doubt you did very well when you first launched Workplace. Stay true to that in this process. I mentioned earlier, though, I wanted to leave you with a lesser discussed mindset around end user migration. And the philosophy here, you can see in the credits at the bottom of the slide, we borrow from Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. Now, bear with me here, because on the face of it, I understand how this might be a bit counterintuitive, but the concept is about leveraging friction to drive engagement. And again, disclaimer, don't misunderstand me. Like, I'm very respectful in all of these processes that we've been involved in. It is really, really, really important to find a platform that's pretty damn close to Workplace in terms of user interface and so on, to minimize the disruption to your users. That's absolutely understood. But I think there are diminishing, potentially reversing returns of trying to have a platform which is identical to Workplace. So what we're doing here is not trying to totally mirror the UX on Workplace. We're deliberately introducing some new ways of working on the platform. So the idea here is that your user expectations are set. They understand, okay, this is a different system, and I do need to think a little about how to interact with it. And don't get frustrated because everything isn't operating as a mirror image. That's the point here. I'll give you an example. It might be that some of you are using chatbots on Workplace. We know they're fairly prolific and a big part of the platform. And like other vendors, obviously, we've got a chat API to allow you to continue having that conversational interface to interact with systems. So, of course, you can carry on doing that. But we can introduce some deliberate differences to make sure that people are interacting mindfully. And in the long term, the idea is that this does increase your engagement and stops that frustration baking in. So some of the folks on the call will be familiar with our micro app capability. Effectively opens up lots of opportunities for you to interact with third-party systems. Great. The point, though, is you can still achieve the same outcome, but in a deliberately different user experience. And I raise this because certainly with some of the migrations that we've done recently, we hear this notion feature parity with Workplace is non-negotiable. We get that. Our point here, though, would be that UX parity is. And I think in some of the examples we've seen where companies are trying to mirror exactly the look and feel of Workplace, you're doing a disservice to your end users in the long run. Now, on that theme of user experience, I want to pass back to Vilas to introduce the third pillar.
Right. Thanks, Pete. Yeah, so the third pillar is really embracing that end user experience and putting yourself into the shoes of your end users, whichever persona it might be, and thinking about the lead up to the launch, the day one of experience that they're going to have when they first switch to Blink or another solution. And then beyond that, how are you going to kind of maintain that thread of communication, and how are you going to keep supporting those users with this new tool and helping them, guiding them in their journey of building these new work and usage habits. So one thing to bear in mind as well as you're, depending on the size of your organization and how much data you have and how much complexity you want to migrate over into Blink, the timelines might contract or extend. With long timelines, you've got this period where you're moving data, but new data is being published on Workplace. So you might need to have kind of follow-up migrations, and this is where this lead up, or thinking from a user experience point of view, from a user shoes, this is where it becomes interesting. Like, if you ask yourself a question like, okay, how is that going to look like for that user? How are they going to orient in this whole new data stream coming into the platform as they're using it? So I'll just echo what Pete said. Just make sure to switch off the music in the first room and turn up the volume up to 11 on the second room. The second point here is evaluating new features to solve all challenges. And I think this is kind of similar to what Pete was mentioning earlier. Blink has such a huge variety of options and methods you can integrate into third-party systems. So we've got APIs, we've got out-of-the-box connectors, you've got micro apps, which just allow you to build out completely new features and experiences and embed them within the Blink app. Make sure to leverage that for your benefit. Take this advantage of migrating to a new platform to leverage those new features. Don't be kind of tied to one method of achieving an outcome that you might have had with Workplace. The third point is also important. It's what happens beyond the day one launch. So anticipate enablement and support needs. Think about the questions that users might come up with. Think about how you're going to respond to all those requests. And I think this is, again, echoing a little bit what Pete said. Think about what will create frustration for your users, because once they're frustrating, they'll make themselves heard. So make sure you're prepared to address that, and also maybe some of this can be done through managing expectations early on before the migration. And then finally, using new features to build new habits. So this kind of takes me to one of the interesting realizations that we had, which we always took for granted. So Blink is a single app. It's all in one. So you've got your feed, you've got your chat in one singular app. another thing is that Blink has a mobile app. It has a desktop app for your Windows or MacBook machine, and it's also available as a web application. So already the dynamic is going to be slightly different in terms of how users interact, because on Workplace you had one app for the feed for the intranet and one app for chat. And on desktop, it was always a web-based application. So kind of think about this interaction between your new solution and your end users, and what kind of thought process they're going to go through. What kind of emotional journey are they going to go through as they're being moved to this new solution. And then finally, the day one experience is really important. This is something that you only get one chance to get it right. And just to kind of give you something a little bit more tangible and visual, one of the approaches that we've developed, and it seems that a lot of our customers who we've migrated and customers who were in the planning process of migration find really attractive is this chatbot that we've plugged into Workplace that actively invites your users to switch to this new exciting platform where all the conversation is happening. So it really kind of streamlines the activation process for those users, making your life and the change management aspect of it much easier. So there's various creative ways that you can leverage to launch with your new solution, and this is just one of them. But really, it's I think, as I say, it's a journey, and it's not just kind of plugging your data into some sort of a black box and then hoping for the best when it comes into the new platform. It's really being mindful and intentional about the way that you're migrating things. And this is, I think, how we're different with in Blink, is we look at it as a partnership. We really want to partner up with you and think about what the end user experience is going to be. How do we migrate that great user experience that you've managed to create on Workplace, and perhaps even improve or streamline it at places when they move to their new solution. I'm going to hand over back to Pete to give you a wrap up and summary of.
Thanks for this. I think you mentioned that word partnerships there. I do just want to mention this right at the last. Like, lots of these names, folks, will be familiar to you, given the way that Workplace interacted and sold the platform. I think all I'd say is, we have formed very close relationships in this space, and like consistently the feedback from the customers we work with is super positive about these partners. Obviously, it goes without saying, lots of them are offering consultations and diagnostics and assessments of the platforms. We just encourage you, if you think that would be helpful, to engage with a partner, to consider the likes of Concentric Line Zero and Work Networks here. Hopefully, though, we've stayed true to the spirit of this webinar, which wasn't sort of saying everything's perfect and this is seamless. We have seen not the wheels come off, but people wish that they had thought about certain things when doing their migrations and going early. Although we haven't mentioned any customer names specifically, hopefully the stories are enough to just give you a couple of things to think about when you're making your platform decision, whether that's Blink or someone else, quite frankly. We get very excited about this, not just because of the technical aspect of it, but also, like, this is a human, psychological, and organizational design challenge. And from our perspective, it's really important to us. Like, our mission has always been to connect and empower every worker. And there are real challenges with doing that when you're launching a new platform, let alone migrating from one to the other. So we are very passionate about what we do. And like, I definitely invite any questions at this point if you think we haven't answered something that you wanted us to. I've been sent a couple, so we could kick us off there. I've got a few in my private channel, one in the open channel here. How long does the whole migration process take with this platform? Great question. Thank you. Who wants to take that? Adrian?
I can take this one. So I think that there's no easy answer to this, and it really depends on how large and complex your organization is, what kind of data you want to migrate, over how much cleanup are you going to do before the migration, or what kind of transformations you want to apply as you're migrating the data into Blink. So just to kind of give you some of idea of how long it takes. We've seen for some simple migrations, it can just take a few weeks, with the technical bit taking perhaps a few hours, but it's really basic, kind of just the core components migration that we saw happening quite quickly and swiftly. For larger organizations with more complexity, listen, we've spoken to a lot of prospects, a lot of customers, and everyone's leveraging the platform in slightly different ways. There's no one size fits all, and this is where we want to really kind of take time to make sure the migration is right for your end users, that you continue to provide them with a great user experience. So those could take anywhere between 1 to a couple of months, perhaps longer, depending on your kind of organization setup. We've got customers who have tens or hundreds of workplace instances, all operating in a very unique way, and kind of finding out those common threads is where the challenge is. And we really want to make it right when during the migration, so that they continue to reap the benefits of that solution.
Thanks, Phyllis. Please do obviously feel free to come back on that question if there's anything that you'd like to ask by way of follow-up. I've got a couple more here too, I think. One of them quite specific. So Meta's added a new feature to download organization data. Can you import that? Who's best to take that, guys?
I'm happy to take that. So yes, we're leveraging that at the moment, but it honestly comes down to your own needs as an organization. If you're leveraging skim functionality for your users and groups, for example, that data is not included in the export. And in that instance, it would make sense to use the Meta or Workplace skim API. If it's regular users and groups that you're managing internally in Workplace, then the export makes perfect sense. So again, just to similar echoes to the answer to the previous question, depends on your needs. There are some bits of media, I'd say, is the big thing that isn't included in the export across the org. And in those cases, we lean on the API to get that extra information.
Thanks, Adrian. I hope that we've answered the question that's come in about chatbots. If not, please feel free to tell me. Otherwise, I'm going to go to a question, a more sort of features and functionality question. So we've talked a lot about the parity of Blink with Meta, but what features does Blink have that Meta did not exist? What features does Blink have that did not exist on Meta Workplace? Thank you. Yes, good point. We have talked a lot about parity. Who wants to take this one?
We can talk about this. So I think one of the things that I'll just call out straight away is that Blink has a desktop app, and that interaction with the platform becomes very different when it's not kind of hidden away somewhere in your browser tabs. The reporting engine, the dashboarding is something that we've invested a lot of time and research and effort into. So we find that it's much richer, and we've also got additional services that we offer to our customers to build out dashboards and reports that are tailored to their business and kind of tie into the KPIs and measures that they want to track that are critical for their business success. What else? Additionally, I think there's a lot more customization options, so you can really brand your experience. You can choose your interface colors, add your logos. You can customize the desktop application or desktop view, because it's fully widgetized, so you can personalize and customize the experience there. And there's a lot more, to be honest. And I think we'd be happy to connect with people who are interested to hear more and have that conversation. But these are just a few that I wanted to name.
Thanks, Phyllis. Widgetization is a word I heard for the first time this week. That was a blessing. I haven't had any come back from any of those questions to say that they have a follow-up question or they'd like some more detail on that. So you've probably got about 30 more seconds to type anything into the chat. One of the questions about the recording, yes, absolutely, we'll get a copy of that out later on. Thank you for today's session, folks. Hopefully this has given you some way to influence and constructively challenge the way that you're thinking about the migration. From our perspective, migration is not just an API, that is table stakes. Mapping onto a new platform is a necessary but not a sufficient part of the whole migration story. I hope we've shared a little bit more about why that is today. We're going to be doing more of these. The more migrations we've done like a bunch already. As we learn, we're going to continue to share and anonymize the stories of those customers with their blessing. And equally, if anyone has any feedback about the content in the session or any more questions before we plan our next one, please get in touch directly. But for today, thanks for joining and great to be with you.
Here.